Okay.
But at least 4 months from the school by Cali.
And you said your father was a carpenter. Was he a farmer too, or just a carpenter?
Yeah, he was a carpenter. Yeah, he farmed too.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a carpenter from. She worked in a carpenter shop in Germany.
Hmm.
So he was a carpenter.
So he was an adult by the time he came to America.
He was much stricter than Mom was.
He was growing up when he came here to the United States?
Yeah, I guess they were all growing up. They had such big families, a lot of them, that they'd have to split up the kids. They would take so much and so many in the family to come across from Germany to the United States. And then if they had more, then some of the older kids would claim some of the younger ones. They'd go in as a few families then. That's the only way to take the kids all along. Yeah, they all moved from there. They all came from.
What are you doing?
My angels are going. Don't worry about it.
Good thing they're not glass.
Grandma, you were telling us about your mother and the yarn that she used to spin.
Yeah, she always made her own yarn. She took that wool and washed it.
From sheep that were raised on your farm, is that right?
They sheared the sheep. And then when she washed it, it would get so pure white. You wouldn't believe that it could get that way, but it did. And then she'd dry it outside. She had a wire or something that she laid it on to dry because she couldn't hang it on a line. And then she'd dry it, and then she'd take it on a spinning wheel, and then she'd make yarn out of it. And that yarn was always just perfect.
What did you make out of it?
Well, everything. We all wore wool stockings in the winter. We always had, she knitted all the stockings for all of us. Just imagine, there was 13 in the family. And then folks too. We all wore wool stockings.
Well, you saved some money that way, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you remember much about your grandparents?
Oh yeah, I knew my dad's dad real well. He lived with Schroeders. Aunt Gertie was Dad's sister. And they were only lived half a mile from where we lived. And Dad's dad stayed with her, with Mrs. Schroeder. Because his wife I never knew. She died before I ever was old enough to know.
What was his name, do you know?
And Mueller.
Oh, right. He was a Miller.
No, not your dad's.
And
No, not your dad's dad.
Yeah, my dad's was Helten.
Yeah.
And my mother was Miller. But my mother came from
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yeah.
Who was it that did the pickled, who did the jarring and the canning?
How'd you preserve foods at home? What did Grandma do with the garden stuff?
Well, she canned it and stuff. But they put it mostly in vinegar and water and stuff. And then and salt and stuff. And then I know that, she made sauerkraut, I just put salt in there. She did that, she made 30 gallons of sauerkraut every fall. We'd take all the garden, we'd help take all the garden stuff in. And we had just a terrible big garden, so it was a whole acre of land. There's so much cabbage and stuff in it, and she'd always make 30 gallons of sauerkraut for the winter.
She was busy.
That's a lot of sauerkraut.
We did it all. Well, we helped with the cabbage. We take it along and help. We take it, bring it in from the garden, and then we take the outside leaves off and wash it and cut it in 2 pieces, just through the middle. And then Mama did all the cutting. They had long boards with little square wooden things on that slide back and forth. And there was blades in there in the bottom, and that would cut them. And she would cut all of it. And then she'd be making the sauerkraut while we'd get it ready. We'd help her get the stuff ready, squash and everything. And then she would put salt in, and she'd put so much in, and then she'd salt. Then she had a great big hammer. I think it was metal. It was real heavy anyhow. And then she packed it as she fixed it. She'd pack it down real tight with that hammer again, and then she'd put some more in, and some more salt, and then she'd pack it down again. It would take her a long time to make 30 gallons. But we always had sauerkraut all winter.
You had 12 brothers and sisters. Do you remember if you had any favorites or any that were closer to your age that you would spend more time with than the
The
others?
boys, the two boys were, there was one boy and then there was a girl, and there was there two girls, and then there was another boy. So those two boys were with the older ones, and the other boy with Julia and were twins, and they were 2 years younger than I was.
Were you one of the younger ones?
About half.
About half?
I was about the middle one, it's about 6, yeah.
Which of your brothers and sisters would you spend most time with when you were growing up?
Well, we were all related, we all lived close together on farms there about a half a mile apart.
But you were with Aggie a lot, weren't you?
Yeah, after a while, Aggie and I were the oldest ones home yet. Then we did all the work. We butchered the chickens that they sold and everything and feathered them all, and we had a big turkey, and it was a tom turkey, and they all had to be butchered. We scalded them and I put all the feathers off, and they didn't take the insides out, the insides had to stay in. So. But then and Aggie and I did all of that all the time. We butchered chickens. We had a building outside that we had special for taking care of that stuff. So we two did all of that, yeah. Yeah, then we were oldest ones home, the others were all along there.
Was it you and Aggie who worked in the cook car then too?
Yeah.
What did you do there?
Well, we cooked for 17 men.
Oh.
We baked the bread and everything. And we baked 13 loaves of bread every day.
Oh, wow.
And then they'd sit down at the table. The bread would be so fresh, we'd always try and bake enough so we'd get some ahead, so it'd get at least a couple of days old before we'd have to feed it to them. But we couldn't get it done there. Like every day and every day. Bread, and then they'd always say, oh, that bread is just like angel food cake. And they'd always rave about that bread. We had one man, he never ate any bread. He always ate soup. We had soup. We made soup at noon with the meal and also in the evening. Because a lot of them liked soup. And we had a lot of vegetable in the soup always. And that one man all he'd eat was soup. And we thought it was so funny. He'd never eat gravy. We always had roasted meat that we could make gravy with in the gravy. We always cooked real good. They always said we were such good cooks. We cooked so good in the cook car. And that man had 2 cook cars. He was our neighbor. And he had 2 trash machines. And he hired my Jack to run the one machine. And he ran the other one. And then he was our boss by the cook car. So he did all our buying, the meat and stuff. And when he'd go to town to get meat, we'd always tell him to be sure. So they give you good tender meat that we were in trouble getting it done. Because we always roasted it, it'd be a big roast. So he always brought real good meat home. And then the other Schroeder worked in the other cook car. One of them, I don't know, the other one wasn't more. And then they always complained that they didn't cook good at all. And she said, we couldn't cook good because we didn't get the kind of meat and stuff that you got. See, I could go to the butcher shop and he'd ask for the better meat, and the meat that would get nice and tender. Where they couldn't, the boss on that machine. And then he'd always buy the cheaper stuff. He said he'd always bring cheap stuff over. And I knew she was a good cook because she'd worked for me before too. And she always cooked real good. But then they couldn't get stuff done like we could because it wasn't as good a meat.
Why did that guy eat only the soup?
Huh?
Why did that fellow eat only soup?
Well, we didn't know. He had a lot of vegetable in, but that's all he ate. He always eat soup. And then Dad went to Minnesota, then Dad knew him from Minnesota. He knew who he was. He didn't know him real well, but he knew him from there though. And then after we were done thrashing, then we were in Minnesota then his wife said to him that he sure liked the soup that he said, you made the best soup all the time. So then we knew why he ate all soup all the time. It had a lot of vegetable stuff in it, but I should think he liked some gravy and you know, with meat and gravy. But he never ate any of that. But then we found out too why he just ate that. So he ate all the soup. No, he ate soup and soup and soup. Of course, we always put a lot of vegetable in it. Because the vegetable the farmers furnished, they all had big gardens and whatever was trashed, they'd furnish the gardens.
You were married then, when you were working in the cook cart?
Dad was working there too.
Mm.
We moved that fall from one place to another, and then we didn't have to be home anyway, then the girls from home. We only lived a mile from town, then we lived right north of Munich then. We just lived there for 2 years.
Is that where Euphelia was born?
No, Euphelia was, we had Euphelia already. Mom had Euphelia there when we were in a cook car.
So tell us about how you met Great-Grandpa Beck.